everyone, and welcome to More Sewing with Michele. My name's Michele Rank, and I am so lucky that I get to show you this wonderful quilt pattern behind me, and it's called Moonstones. Now, Moonstones is from Laundry Basket Quilts and was designed by Edyta Sitar, one of my favorite quilt designers. I have featured some of her projects before called Silhouettes, and you'll be able to access that link too. But what I'm showing you here today is a little bit different than Silhouettes. It would be traditional piecing, and then you can see by the quilt in back of me, it's actually curved piecing, which is one of those types of quilting that gives people a little bit of fear as far as sewing. But I'm going to show you how to do it. I've got a demo here today, and I can't wait to get going on this episode of More Sewing with Michele, featuring Moonstones by Laundry Basket Quilts. So let's talk about Moonstones. First of all, the quilt in back of me. Oh my golly, I absolutely loved putting it together. Now, if you're like me, and I know there's a lot of you out there like me, I collect fabrics, and the inspiration for what fabrics I was going to use on the quilt in back of me is I started collecting Australian Aboriginal art fabrics many, many years ago. And what happens is I start collecting them bit by bit. I'd pick them up at a store if I fell in love with one of the fabrics, or at Road to California, or, pretty much so anywhere that I run into fabric. If I saw the Australian print fabric, I would pick some up. And then, fast forward a few years later, I've got a nice pile of fabrics, and I've always been just putting them aside to find the right design or the right quilt to use them in. And it turned out that the Moonstone pattern behind me is what I decided to first use some of them for. And I know you're like me. The first time you cut into that big selection of fabrics, it's like the bottle's been uncorked from your wine bottle, and now that bottle's going to be used. But I've been savoring those fabrics for years, and I just love the way that it turned out. Now, with Moonstones, you're going to be using, we have the pattern here, Moonstones by Edyta Sitar, and she owns Laundry Basket Quilts. And in here, you will see, I've got all my little notes here because I altered the pattern slightly. But you will see that her pattern had a big grid, like so. And on there, let me show you the picture up close so you can see. So you can see she had a little bit different fabrics, which is pretty normal. Anytime you get a pattern, it doesn't mean you're going to use exactly the same fabrics that's on the pattern. But I knew since these circles had 4 different patterns, I wouldn't want anything with a big print as far as on the fabrics. So that's why this Australian Aboriginal prints were perfect, because they typically have small detailed little designs. They may have, they have animals, kangaroos, they have the monitor lizards, they have some of those things in the design, but it was okay if I got a head or a tail, that type of thing. It was mostly for the prints themselves and the dot art that they use. So it was a perfect marriage, we'll say, between the quilt design by Edyta, Moonstones, and my fabrics. So what I'm trying to get at is you're going to want to use a smaller print or solids or batik, something like that, where, if you have a big, large thing, getting them onto these small circles is going to be difficult unless you do the full circle. But with Moonstones, it's deliberately made to have those circles be quartered out. And in order to do that, there's 2 different ways you can do it. Now, if you just buy the pattern here today on More Sewing with Michele, you'll get the pattern, you'll get all of the information. But in there, they also give you the old school templates where you can take a cereal box or something, and you can use these to cut out your templates to make those pieces. But in my world, why go to all the frustration, especially since Edyta Sitar thought of that beforehand? And what she has done is she's made little ruler type templates for us. And you will see that we have the two pieces here. We have the curved and also the round part, and it makes it super duper easy. So now you're going to just collect all the fabrics that you want to use, line them up, and you're going to use these templates to cut out your pieces. And like I've said so many times before, why give yourself the frustrations of making things more difficult when there are tools to make things easier? Now, I will add, in order to cut on round things, you're not going to want to use your normal 45 or 60 rotary cutter. You want to drop down to a 28, and that's the size. So it's like that little itty bitty dinky rotary cutter, and that's going to make cutting these curved elements a breeze. And on here, you will see that we have registration marks. So we have holes. She has this one listed B, this one's A, and this one has the registration marks too. She also has, let me see if I hold it up real quick. You can also see that she has on here, she has the 1/4 inch marking. So if you wanted to really take your time to have a complete precision element to it, you can mark your registration marks, take a pencil, make a line between them so that it's kind of, it makes sewing a breeze. Now, I will show you in my demo how to do that as well as just winging it, so to speak. And there's no right or wrong way. It all depends upon your skill and your comfortability of sewing. Now, sometimes people will say, you have to, there's beginning, intermediate, advanced. I don't always follow those rules because I believe truly in my heart that any type of quilt pattern can be done by any skill level. It's just a matter of understanding the technique, taking your time, which is the key element. And I am so guilty of being a fast sewer and impatient, and I want to get going and I want to go on to the fun where those quilt blocks start coming together. But if you take your time when you're learning a new sewing process or technique, it's going to really help in getting that grasp down to where you can just go gangbusters a little bit later. So I always suggest you take your time when you're learning a new technique. And with this, sewing on a curved, if you've never done it before, it's not difficult. I mean, it's just a matter of taking your time and knowing all these little tips and tricks to help you along the way. And I will help you as much as I can. So here's the deal. We have 2 items that we have today on More Sewing with Michele. We have the Moonstone Templates as well as the pattern. And both of them, you can just get the pattern. And like I said, you can wing it. I highly suggest you get the pattern and the templates. It'll make your life easier, and it's just one more thing. And then that way you don't have to worry about down the road. You can use these for lots of other things. So I love them, and I think they're essential. So with that said, let me get on to the next step of putting moonstones together. So let me talk a little bit about moonstones and how to put it together. So the first thing that you're going to notice is in the pattern here. In all the instructions, very clear and concise, which is what I like. You get the template. It gives you the layout for her design. But what I also like is she goes over how to put it together, how easy it is, and also the different ways as far as laying out your fabrics. Now on the quilt that I did in back of me, I used basically the same background fabric across the board. On her sample, she used different ones. So there's always, I've always told you that lots of options that you have. So just because someone's quilt pattern, has XYZ doesn't mean that you need to use XYZ. Try using, Q, R, and I in the mix too, which is often what I do. I sometimes, if I see a quilt pattern and it has the background in lights, I will go to darks. I'm a renegade. I love switching things up and making the quilt mine, which is why I love quilting, because you can take something and make it completely yours where there's no other quilt out there that looks like yours. And I think that's pretty special. So you're going to be able to alter the pattern and the plan. And I know a lot of people, when they get a quilt pattern, they do it to a T. And I often, I like to add the elements of borders and sashings. And like I stated before, I didn't want another really big quilt, but yet I wanted to make the pattern. So I just shrunk it a little bit. And actually, I have my notes in here. I often write on the patterns themselves, all the notes as far as what I did before. And let me see if I can find them. Like I have some notes there. Oh, it must be on the inside. So on the inside here, I actually did 32 whole circles, and then I did 6 half circles. So my quilt is a lot smaller, and then I added the borders. So, you know, it's completely up to you. There's no right or wrong, as I said. It's a matter of your personal preference. And also, if you're making it for someone, they may want it on a bed, or they may want it on a wall, and they may want it a certain size. But those options are completely up to you as far as how you put it together. Let me show you some of these really cool fabrics I have real quick. So this is the Aboriginal Australian prints, and you can see some of them. They're just so fabulous. Let me go to one of my favorite ones. I love this one. So it's typically like dot art. They like to incorporate lots of animals. Let me get one that, if I can see one here that has, well, that has some kangaroos on there, but not that many. And then they have just plain, just a bunch of dots. But I've fallen in love with all of these fabrics. Oh, there you go. There's a big kangaroo. So love these, and they're so much fun to work with because of the bright colors, and they typically all have like really small details. So I love that. Now with that, you can see what you're going to basically be doing is sewing a piece together like this, and you can see the curved seam, which oftentimes really gives people a little bit of fright, and they're worried if they can get it straight and if it's going to look right. And like I said, I believe anyone can do this. And then with that, you'll end up with a block that looks like this. So you can see I have the 4 sections. Let me pull this one up again, that you sew together, and you have all of those pieces. Now, as I've talked to before, if you open your seams, close your seams, you can see I have seams that are ironed to one side on the curved elements. Because of the bulk, I like to open my seams when I'm sewing them together, and that way they will help everything lay nice and flat and not have a lot of bulk in the center and on the sides where those pieces come together. So there's one completed block. On this one, it was leftover pieces, so you can see I used 2 of the same fabrics. There are so many options with this quilt, though. I was originally going to do some kind of mix of, 4 and then 3 and 2. I do have on my quilt, I have sections where I like to have some of the lighter quadrants together, and then I have darker where there's mostly blue. So I tried to have a little bit of flow of color, but for the most part, it's pretty much so random, and it was a matter of, oh, I think that one will look good. And then once I had the blocks pieced together, then I decided what blocks I wanted next to each other. So that's always so much fun for me when you actually get the blocks completed, deciding where they're going to be, especially if it is with mixed fabrics or in a scrappy type of feel. Then there's so much joy when you finally get those things pieced together and you can see how the quilt is going to come together. I love it. And then once again on my quilt, I have all of the same background all the way through, which makes it really difficult to see where those seams are. But this is a seam here, this is another seam, and up. So with the quilting that I decided to do, the straight line quilting on this one, it makes it a little bit difficult to see where these blocks are hidden. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It was just, like I said, I often, when I finish piecing my quilt top, I look at it and I let it tell me how it needs to be quilted based on lots of things. And on this particular quilt, I used just a neutral thread all the way through on the front and the back because I didn't want those threads to take away from any of the design elements of the moonstones themselves. The only exception is that I did stitch around the ditch, which I talked before, around the sashing, and then on the sides, I just did a meandering straight line quilting to give it some of a different feel on the corners of my quilt. So super easy. Definitely everything can be done on your home computer. Whoops, home computer. What am I talking about? On your home sewing machine. I didn't do any long arming, and I did no free motion on this quilt when I finished it, which is kind of weird because I love doing free motion. So with this said, let me talk about the registration marks once again on the templates. So you can see that we have these holes, the registration marks. And on this one, this is one of my fabrics here. You can see that I've taken a pencil, and all that I did was line up the template, and then I stuck a pencil through on all of those registration marks. Now, the one thing you're going to want to make sure is that you have a sharp tip on your pencil, because if it's dull, you're going to have a problem getting through there. Now, I don't want to talk about a lot of other stuff, but keep in mind, I don't like to use frictions on especially light fabrics because there is a chemical trail. So I highly recommend that you just use a number 2 pencil that'll come out in the wash. And then that will make it easier to line your pieces up. Now you can see, how are you going to pin together something like that? And that's where these registration marks come in handy. Now, with the registration marks, I also like to do another trick that I have found to be super useful when I am sewing a curved seam. So you will see on this, I have the registration marks, but then I folded this in half and I've ironed a crease right in the center there. So let me open it up. And this is on the inside or the back side of the fabric. You can see that's the front of the fabric. Everything is nice and kosher, no marks, no nothing. But I have that line, and that makes it easier to line up your pieces when on the second piece, I also have this crease where I've taken it and I've just ironed a little crease right in that fabric there. So now what I do is I'm going to line up right sides together, and I'm going to take those 2 creases and make sure that they both are running parallel to each other. And then I will take a pin it, and I want you to remember also, I leave my pin tips about 1/4 inch away from the side. So I do the center, and then I will pull this, and I'm going to pull this to the side, and I'm going to line up my sides as well. And this is one of those things where I do take my time to do my pinning precisely and correctly, because where people usually get frustrated and lose themselves, and then they'll put something aside and they don't want to finish, is because something hasn't come together quite right. It's a common theme we have. I've done it. I think everyone's done it, where you just get really frustrated the way something's coming together. You put it aside and you deal with it another day. I don't want that for you guys, though. I want you to take your time, especially when you're learning this technique, to make sure that your first seam is going to go as flawlessly as possible. So now you can see I have the side here put together and the side there, and I have that center. Now this is where I take it, and I'm going to show you on the camera. I take it and I push to the back that other piece like so. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to find smack dab in the middle of those 2 pins, that same spot, and I'm going to pin. And then I kind of take it and I manipulate it. You can see from the back here, I'm making sure everything's lined up. I put it back to the other side and I add another pin. And like you've heard me tell you before, I generally don't pin things, but when it comes to curved seams, pins are going to be your best friend, hands down. So then I take it one more time, line it up, make sure that everything is kosher, pull it to the other side, and I add another pin. So you can see I've got quite a few pins there, and I will do it one more time so you can see. You can see that they're not lined up. I simply kind of scooch them together so that everything is completely lined up. And I always go to the center next. Go to the center, pin it, and then you can kind of pull it. I always go to the back, make sure that everything's lined up, pull it again, do your pinning, and one more time I will add one more. And you can see there's like a pucker. So you're going to make sure that you get everything lined up and then add a pin in it. Put a pin in it. So now you'll see that we have something that looks like this. And then the next step is simply to take your time and sew. Now, because there's so many pins in it, I'm going to definitely drop my speed, and I'm going to show you a few techniques as far as actually sewing that's going to make it easier for you too. So let me get the machine set up and I'll move right on to that. So I know you've fallen in love with Moonstones, just like I did. In order to pick up the items from Laundry Basket Quilts, you're going to go to moors-sew.com, or you can click on the link in the description of this video that'll take you to the More Sewing with Michele landing page, where you can click on today's episode, Moonstones, and pick up those items there as well. Don't forget that we have coupon codes, and our coupon code is listed right here, and you'll want to use it every time you purchase from More Sewing with Michele. So today's episode, Moonstones, we have the pattern Moonstones from Laundry Basket Quilts, designed by Edyta Sitar, and in there you will have all the information you need as well as paper templates. But in my book, why use paper when you can have an actual ruler template to get the job done easier, faster, and it's going to last you for years to come. So there's also the plastic templates for the Moonstones pattern. So either way, you're going to want to get Moonstones template as well as pattern. And then you can create that wonderful quilt in back of you as well. Okay, so here once again, we have this item ready to go, nice and pinned. And keep in mind, the real trick is when you start, you want to make sure that first one where I've lined up those creases, that everything is plumb and kosher. And you can see how it is on here. I've got that crease and that crease lined. And then it's just that much easier to put your sides together and continue pinning till you have a pinned piece that comes out like this. It just makes life so much easier for you. Now I'm in machine. I've got it set up with a 1/4 inch sewing, and also I have my flange on here. So the first step is I kind of hold it down, get it lined up, drop my foot. You can drop your needle if you want to too. And you're going to want to make sure that you sew a 1/4 inch. Now, in my world, I like sewing a 1/4 inch. A 1/4 inch is a 1/4 inch. And if everything's sold a 1/4 inch, everything's going to line up perfectly. So then all I'm going to do is give it a little gas. And I have to kind of contort myself so my hands aren't in the way. But what I'm going to do then, make sure my speed's dropped, going to sew. And then I'm just easing into that curve, like so. And keep in mind, my pins are a 1/4 inch away from the side, so I don't have to worry about sewing over a pin. But as you sew, you can see it kind of bulks up. So here's one of the tricks that I often do. Super important is I will raise the pedal, the foot lever, and I will pull it. And I like to pull then the extra pins out and get them out of the way. And then what I do is I kind of take to the back. You can see where it's kind of in the back here. I kind of pull it to the top part. And what that does is it gets a lot of the bulk out of the way. That area has already been sewn, and that way it makes it easier. So then I'm going to once again drop it and then continue to sew. And what you can do, if you take your time and you use your finger in front of where you're sewing, you can kind of feel if there's going to be a crease or a pleat. We don't want that. So take your time and make sure that I keep wanting to put my hand up here, but that's going to block your view. So, and then you're just going to simply ease it along, stop, lift, take the pins out, pull to the back side, that extra fabric again, and then you can drop. I like to make sure that I don't feel any puckers and pleats, and then I keep sewing. So as you can see, this isn't going to be a super fast piece, but the trick is we don't want to go fast because we want to make sure that those curved seams are as precise without puckers and pleats as possible. So once again, lift, pull the pins out of the way, pull that fabric to the back here, pull it away from where you're sewing, press down, make sure that there's nothing in the way when you're sewing, and then just slowly do your turning again. Lift. So there's a lot of repetition to it. Now when you get to the end, it's always a little bit more funky because as you can see, if I lift this up a little, you can see where it's got a nice big pleat there. So what I'm going to do once again on this part, because it's at the end, I'm holding my finger here, lifting this up, and let me see if I can maneuver this fabric. So you can see I'm then pulling this fabric away. And what that does is it minimizes all of that pleating that can potentially happen. Drop my foot again, and then I'll be able to sew up to the end. Feeling once again that there's no puckers and pleats. Take your time, follow the curve, get to the end, cut it. Take out my last pin, and you can see now I have that curved seam together. Pull it to the other side, and voila! It's a perfectly sewn curved seam. The next step would be to press that seam, and once again, you will get, where's my completed ones here? You'll get something that looks like this, and then you can simply, put things together. So, same fabrics here, just a little bit different, but you can see I have no puckers and pleats. Everything is sewn together perfectly. And that's just it. Take your time. Follow those steps. Pull that extra fabric away. Make sure you take your time, and you're going to be a success at piecing your curved seams. Okay, so I wanted to show you the quilt I did so you understand kind of how I went about it. So let me get a little closer. So you can see I did alter the pattern slightly. First off, let's talk about the rounds. You can see that we've got the 4 pieces. I've got, the different fabrics. It's a little bit, the way that I quilted them, it's a little bit hard to tell that they were pieced because I had that grid pattern. On the corners, I simply did a straight line kind of curved element that goes all the way to the top, and then I have it there, and then there are halves on those circles. So as you can see, lots of different colors, lots of different prints. I added a panel. I did not quite as many rounds as she had on hers. At some point, I just don't need, another huge quilt. So I wanted to make moonstones, but I also wanted it to be a little bit smaller. And I love adding borders. Tying in the black little border with the binding was fun too. So super fun. And it's one of these quilts. It could be maybe one of those things to challenge you, to get you to do something a little bit different than what you're used to. So you can see some of my fun fabrics here. So anyways, that's a close-up of the quilt. Let's get on to the other business. So there you have it for Moonstones. You're going to want to get your pattern, Moonstones, designed by Edyta Sitar, as well as these wonderful templates. I tell you, they are worth their weight in gold. Make things so much easier to create the quilt in back of me. So templates and pattern. And then with that, you're going to be able to make these wonderful pieced quadrants for the Moonstone that will get you the really cool pieced block here. So that's all I have for this episode of More Sewing with Michele. I look forward to seeing you in about 2 weeks on the next episode. And then until then, happy stitching, everyone. Bye-bye.